A little black girl begs a billionaire to hide her from her dad, crying in the rain, clutching a torn pink backpack like her life depends on it. He thinks it's just a frightened child running from trouble, until he opens her bag. Inside is something that stops his heart, a photo of his late wife, smiling and pregnant, with a note that says, "For you." Now this powerful man, who spent years alone, must face a truth that could destroy everything he thought he knew. Who is this girl? Why does she have a picture of his dead wife? And what secret has been hiding in that bag all along? Because when a billionaire opens his door to a child begging for safety, he has no idea he's about to find his own blood. Will he risk everything to protect her, or lose her to the man who already destroyed their past? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The rain drummed against the windows of the sleek black limousine as it glided through downtown Atlanta's glistening streets. Richard Cole sat rigid in the leather seat, his thoughts scattered like the raindrops streaming down the tinted glass. The little girl beside him huddled as far into the corner as she could, her wet clothes leaving dark patches on the expensive upholstery. Under the warm interior lights, Richard could see her more clearly now. Her braided hair was coming undone, and her pink backpack, faded and worn, trembled in her tight grip. Her sneakers were soaked through, small puddles forming beneath her feet. "What's your name?" Richard asked, keeping his voice gentle. His own heart was racing, unsure if he'd made the right decision by letting her into his car. The girl's eyes darted to him, then back to the window. "Amara," she whispered. "Amara Jackson." Richard noticed a small tear in her jacket sleeve, and something about its ragged edge made his chest tighten. He remembered Elaine's voice, how she always said God puts people in our path for a reason. 5 years without her, and still her wisdom echoed in his quietest moments. "I'm Richard," he said, loosening his bow tie. The charity gala's pretense of caring suddenly felt hollow compared to the real need sitting next to him. "Are you hungry, Amara?" She nodded slightly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "Yes, sir." "James," Richard called to his chauffeur, "let's stop at that diner on Peachtree." He turned back to Amara. "Would you like a hot chocolate? Maybe some pancakes?" For the first time, a tiny smile flickered across her face. "Yes, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The limousine pulled into the parking lot of the 24-hour Bright Spot diner, its neon sign casting blue and pink reflections on the wet pavement. Richard noticed how Amara's eyes scanned the lot, checking every shadow. "It's okay," he assured her. "You're safe here." Inside the diner, the fluorescent lights were harsh after the dim comfort of the car. The late-hour waitress, her name tag reading Betty, raised an eyebrow at the odd pair, a man in a tuxedo and a soaked little girl, but led them to a corner booth without comment. Amara slid into the vinyl seat, still clutching her backpack. Richard sat across from her, trying to project calm, while his mind raced through possibilities. Something was clearly wrong, but he needed to be careful about how he asked. "Order whatever you'd like," he said, handing her a laminated menu. Her small fingers traced the pictures of pancakes and waffles. Could I have the chocolate chip pancakes?" she asked, as if expecting him to say no. "Of course, and hot chocolate too, remember?" When Betty returned, Richard ordered chocolate chip pancakes, hot chocolate with extra whipped cream for Amara, and black coffee for himself. As they waited, he studied the girl across from him. Despite her obvious fear, there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Elaine, a quiet strength, an unshakable faith. "Amara," he said carefully, "I want to help you, but I need to understand what's happening. Why were you running from your father?" Her hands tightened around her backpack. He gets mad sometimes. Really mad." She swallowed hard. "Today was really bad. I couldn't stay there anymore." Richard felt a familiar ache in his chest, the same pain he'd felt whenever Elaine would come home from her teaching job, telling him about students she suspected were being hurt at home. His wife had always wanted to do more, to save them all. "Does he hurt you?" Richard asked, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. Amara nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Sometimes, but mostly he hurts Mama. Tonight was different, though. He had that look in his eyes, the really scary one. So I grabbed my special stuff and ran." Betty arrived with their drinks, and Richard watched as Amara wrapped her hands around the warm mug of hot chocolate, letting the steam rise up to warm her face. The whipped cream had a perfect swirl on top, crowned with chocolate sprinkles. "Your special stuff?" Richard asked after Betty left. Amara carefully unzipped her backpack and pulled out a worn sketchbook. "My drawings," she explained, "and my Mama's Bible and my special pencils." She hugged the backpack close again, as if afraid someone might take it. The pancakes arrived, golden brown and studded with melting chocolate chips. Amara's eyes widened at the sight, and Richard felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness watching her carefully cut her first bite. "These are the best pancakes ever," she said after swallowing, offering him a real smile this time. Richard smiled back, though his mind was already working through what needed to be done. He couldn't simply return her to an abusive home, but he also couldn't legally keep her without involving the authorities. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, familiar yet different from his business decisions. "Amara," he said, waiting until she looked up from her pancakes. "I want you to know something important. What happened tonight? You finding me being there at that exact moment, that wasn't just chance. My wife Elaine, she used to tell me that God puts us where we need to be, exactly when we need to be there." "She sounds nice," Amara said softly. "Where is she now?" Richard's throat tightened. "She passed away 5 years ago, but she was very nice. She was a teacher, and she helped lots of kids who were having hard times." "I'm sorry she died," Amara said, with such genuine compassion that Richard had to blink back tears. "Do you miss her?" "Every day," he admitted. "But right now I think she'd want me to focus on helping you." Amara took another bite of pancakes, chewing thoughtfully. "Do you believe in angels, Mr. Richard?" The question caught him off guard. I suppose I do. Why do you ask?" "Because I prayed for one today," she said simply. "When Daddy was really mad, I hid in my closet and prayed for an angel to help me. And then I found you." Richard felt something shift inside him, like a key turning in a long locked door. The emptiness that had been his constant companion since Elaine's death seemed to recede, just a little. "Well," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm not an angel, but I promise I'll do everything I can to help you." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, Amara carefully eating every bite of her pancakes, while Richard sipped his coffee and made some discreet phone calls. By the time they were ready to leave, the rain had softened to a gentle patter. As they walked back to the car, Amara reached for his hand. Her small fingers wrapped around his, trusting and warm, and Richard felt the weight of that trust settle into his bones. Whatever came next, he knew with absolute certainty that meeting this child was no accident. Whether it was divine intervention or simple human compassion that had made him stop for her, he was now responsible for ensuring her safety. The limousine pulled away from the diner, its headlights cutting through the misty rain. In the back seat, Amara had finally dozed off, her head resting against the window, her precious backpack still held tight against her chest. Richard watched her sleep, thinking about choices and consequences, about faith and responsibility, about the mysterious ways God works to put broken pieces back together. As they drove through the quiet streets of Atlanta, Richard realized that for the first time in 5 years, his heart didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The sleek limousine wound its way through the iron gates of Richard Cole's estate, the security lights casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Rain still drummed steadily against the windows as they pulled up to the grand entrance of his Georgian-style mansion. Richard glanced at Amara, who had pressed herself against the car door, her eyes wide as she took in the imposing structure. "It's just a house," Richard said softly, trying to ease her obvious tension. "A bit too big for one person, really." The chauffeur opened the door, holding a large umbrella over them as they made their way up the granite steps. Richard noticed how Amara's grip tightened on her backpack, her knuckles white against the faded pink fabric. The massive wooden door swung open silently, revealing a foyer with soaring ceilings and a crystal chandelier that cast rainbow prisms across the marble floors. "Let's get you warm and dry," Richard said, leading her toward the living room. "Mrs. Martinez, my housekeeper, has already gone home for the night, but I can manage some hot cocoa." Amara followed him cautiously, her wet shoes squeaking against the hardwood floors. The living room was elegant but cold, with leather furniture and abstract art on the walls. She perched on the very edge of a leather sofa, her eyes darting between Richard and the front door. "No one can get past the gates without security clearance," Richard assured her, noticing her vigilance. "You're safe here." He disappeared briefly into a nearby closet, returning with a soft chenille throw blanket in a warm shade of blue. "This was Elaine's favorite," he said, holding it out to her. "She always said it felt like being hugged by a cloud." Amara accepted the blanket with trembling hands, wrapping it around her shoulders. Her wet clothes had left dark patches on the leather sofa, but Richard couldn't bring himself to care about the furniture. "I'll be right back with that cocoa," he said. In the kitchen, his hands moved automatically through the motions of heating milk and mixing in chocolate powder. His mind raced with questions he wasn't sure how to ask, with fears he couldn't quite name. When he returned with a steaming mug topped with mini marshmallows, Amara had drawn her feet up onto the sofa, cocooned in the blanket. She looked impossibly small against the massive piece of furniture. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the mug carefully. Richard sat in an adjacent armchair, maintaining what he hoped was a comfortable distance. "Amara," he began gently, "I need to look in your backpack for some identification. Maybe a school ID or something that could help us contact someone who can help you. Would that be okay?" She clutched the bag tighter for a moment, then slowly nodded. "Mama said to keep everything in here safe." Richard moved to sit beside her on the sofa, and she handed him the backpack with obvious reluctance. The zipper stuck slightly as he opened it, revealing a few items of clothing, the mentioned Bible, and a well-worn sketchbook. His hands moved carefully through the contents, searching for anything that might help identify her family situation. His fingers brushed against something wrapped in paper. As he pulled it out, he noticed it was carefully wrapped in a white napkin, the kind from a diner. His heart seemed to stop as he unfolded the napkin, revealing a photograph he'd thought lost forever. There was Elaine, her face glowing with joy, one hand resting on her very pregnant belly. The photo had been taken at their favorite spot in Piedmont Park, the afternoon light catching her hair like a halo. Richard's hands began to shake as he turned the photo over. Tucked behind it was a folded piece of paper, and even before he opened it, he recognized the elegant slant of Elaine's handwriting. "For Richard. If anything ever happens to me." The room seemed to tilt sideways. He hadn't seen that handwriting in 5 years, hadn't allowed himself to look at photos of Elaine pregnant because the loss had been too raw, too devastating. Their unborn child, taken in the same accident that claimed his wife. It was a wound that had never truly healed. His voice cracked, and he had to clear his throat before continuing. Where did you get this? Amara looked confused by his reaction, her brow furrowing. Mama put it in there. She said it was important to keep it safe until the right time. She took another sip of cocoa, leaving a small marshmallow mustache on her upper lip. I don't know what's in the note. I never opened it. Richard's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper, but he couldn't bring himself to read it yet. First, he needed answers. Your mama, what's her name? Tanya, Amara replied. Tanya Jackson. But she's been gone a long time now. Richard's mind raced, trying to make connections that seemed impossible. Elaine had worked with underprivileged families through her teaching job, but she'd never mentioned anyone named Tanya. How had this photo ended up with this child? He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Marcus Wheeler, his attorney. Despite the late hour, Marcus answered on the second ring. Richard, everything all right? I need you at the house, Richard said, his voice tight with tension. And contact the police. We have a situation with a child who needs protection and... He glanced at the photo again. Something else that needs investigation. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Marcus replied without hesitation. Want me to call Detective Barnes? She's handled sensitive cases for us before. Yes, please. Richard ended the call and turned back to Amara, who was watching him with wary eyes over the rim of her cocoa mug. Are you mad? She asked in a small voice. No, sweetheart, not at all. Richard assured her quickly. Just confused. And worried about you. Some people are coming who can help us figure everything out. They're good people, I promise. Amara nodded slowly, but her posture remained tense. She set down her empty mug and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Mr. Richard? Yes? The lady in the picture. She looks kind, like an angel. Richard felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. She was kind, the kindest person I've ever known. Looked down at the folded note in his hands, still unopened. Whatever message Elaine had left him, whatever connection existed between her and this child, he knew with absolute certainty that nothing about this night was coincidence. The security system chimed, announcing the arrival of vehicles at the gate. Richard stood, tucking the photo and note carefully into his jacket pocket. That'll be my attorney and the police, he explained to Amara. Remember what I said. They're here to help. As headlights swept across the windows, Richard found himself standing protectively near Amara's end of the sofa. In the space of a few hours, this child had upended his carefully ordered world, but more than that, she had brought with her a piece of Elaine he thought was lost forever. Whatever happened next, he knew he couldn't let her down, either of them. The harsh sound of the doorbell pierced the quiet of Richard's mansion. Amara jumped, her small hand instinctively grabbing Richard's sleeve. He could feel her trembling through the fabric. It's all right, he said softly. These are good people who want to help. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, appeared from the kitchen and opened the front door. 2 police officers stood on the doorstep, a tall woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a younger male officer whose notepad was already in hand. Good evening, Mr. Cole, the female officer said, showing her badge. I'm Officer Patricia Martinez, and this is Officer James Thompson. We received a call about a possible child welfare situation. Richard nodded, conscious of Amara's grip tightening on his sleeve. Yes, thank you for coming. Please, come in. The officers entered, their shoes squeaking slightly on the marble floor. Officer Martinez's experienced eyes took in the scene. The wealthy businessman in his tuxedo, The small girl in wet clothes wrapped in an expensive blanket, the empty cocoa mug on the coffee table. "Can you tell us what happened tonight?" Officer Thompson asked, pen poised over his notepad. Before Richard could speak, Amara's voice came out in a rush. "Please don't make me go back to him, please!" Her words caught in her throat. "He hits me when he drinks, and Mama went to heaven. I don't want to go back." Officer Martinez's face softened as she knelt down to Amara's eye level. "Can you tell me your full name, sweetheart?" "Amara Jackson," she whispered, still holding on to Richard's sleeve like a lifeline. "And how old are you, Amara?" 9 years old. The officers exchanged glances. Thompson scribbled in his notepad, while Martinez continued her gentle questioning. "Can you tell me about your father? What's his name?" Amara's face clouded. "Marcus Jackson. But he's not my real daddy. Mama told me that before she—" Her voice trailed off, and she pressed closer to Richard's side. Richard spoke up, his voice firm. "I found her outside the charity gala at the Hyatt tonight. She was terrified, soaking wet, and begging for help. I couldn't just leave her there." "And you've never met her before tonight?" Officer Thompson asked, his pen scratching across the paper. "No, but—" Richard hesitated, thinking of the photograph. Should he mention it? Not yet, he decided, not until he understood more. "But I couldn't send her back to an abusive situation. I called my attorney and then you immediately." Officer Martinez stood up, her knees cracking slightly. "Standard procedure would be to take her to the precinct and contact child services." "No!" Amara cried out, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please don't take me there. He'll find me." Richard felt something protective surge in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. "I'd prefer we wait for social services to come here. She's been through enough tonight without being dragged to a police station." His tone carried the weight of his influence, though he tried to keep it gentle. "I'm happy to provide a safe space until proper arrangements can be made." The officers had another silent exchange. Finally, Martinez nodded. "Given the circumstances, and your standing in the community, Mr. Cole, we can work with that. We'll need to run some checks on the father and verify her mother's situation. Someone from social services should be here within the hour." As Thompson took down more details, Richard noticed Amara's eyes growing heavy. The adrenaline that had kept her going was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion. She swayed slightly on her feet. "Would it be all right if she rests while we wait?" Richard asked. "It's been a long night for her." Martinez nodded. "Of course. We'll need to speak with her more later, but she's safe now." Richard guided Amara to the leather sofa. She curled up immediately, still clutching her pink backpack. Mrs. Chen appeared with a soft quilted throw, one of Elaine's favorites, Richard realized with a pang, and draped it over the child. "Thank you," Amara murmured, her eyes already closing. The officers moved to the foyer to make their calls, and Richard began to pace the living room. His hand kept straying to his jacket pocket, where Elaine's photograph seemed to burn against his chest. The image of her pregnant form haunted him, stirring up memories he'd tried to bury. They'd lost their baby in the 6th month of pregnancy. Elaine had been devastated, retreating into herself. Then came the mysterious illness, the sudden decision to seek treatment abroad. He'd wanted to go with her, but she'd insisted on going alone, saying she needed time to heal both body and spirit. She never came home. The official report said her small, chartered plane had crashed in the mountains. No survivors, no bodies recovered. He'd spent a fortune on private investigators, but they'd found nothing concrete. Now this photograph appeared, one he'd never seen before, along with a note he still hadn't found the courage to read. And this child, this strange, brave little girl who carried them both. Richard stopped pacing and looked at Amara's sleeping form. In sleep, her face lost its wariness, revealing the innocent she should have been allowed to remain. Her small hand still gripped the backpack, even in sleep, as if it contained all that was precious in her world. His throat tightened as he remembered doing the same thing with Elaine's pillow in those first terrible months after losing her. Holding on to something, anything, that could anchor you when your world was spinning out of control. Moving quietly, he adjusted the quilt where it had slipped from Amara's shoulder. His hand hovered over her head for a moment before gently smoothing back a strand of hair from her forehead. The simple gesture cracked something in his chest, a wall of ice he'd built around his heart years ago. Mrs. Chen appeared at his elbow with a cup of coffee. "You should sit, Mr. Cole," she said softly. "It's been a long night for you too." Richard accepted the coffee but remained standing, his gaze fixed on Amara. "She reminds me of someone, Mrs. Chen, the way she looks when she's thinking hard about something, the way she holds herself, even when she's scared." "She reminds you of Mrs. Elaine," Mrs. Chen said simply. Richard nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The resemblance wasn't physical. Amara's features were entirely different from Elaine's. But there was something in her spirit, in the quiet dignity she maintained even in fear, that echoed his late wife. The sound of more cars pulling up outside broke into his thoughts. Social services had arrived. Soon there would be more questions, more decisions to make. But for now, in this quiet moment, Richard stood guard over a sleeping child who had somehow breached all his defenses in a single stormy night. Whatever secrets lay in that photograph and note, whatever connection existed between Amara and his past, one thing was certain. He couldn't walk away from this. Not when every protective instinct he possessed was screaming that this child needed him. Not when, for the first time in 5 years, he felt truly awake. The quilt rose and fell with Amara's steady breathing, and Richard found himself matching his own breath to its rhythm. Outside, car doors slammed, footsteps approached. The night wasn't over yet, but something had already changed irrevocably. In trying to save a stranger, he might have started saving himself. Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows of Richard Cole's mansion, catching dust motes that danced in the golden beams. The house felt different today, less like a museum and more like a home, thanks to the small figure perched at the granite island counter. Amara sat on a high stool, her legs swinging beneath her as she watched Richard with curious eyes. He stood at the stove, spatula in hand, trying to remember how to make the heart-shaped pancakes Elaine used to create. "Would you like blueberries in yours?" he asked, attempting to sound casual, despite his nervousness. It had been years since he'd cooked for anyone. "Yes, please," Amara replied softly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore fresh clothes that Mrs. Chen had purchased early that morning, a simple purple sweater and jeans that made her look more like a typical 9-year-old and less like the rain-soaked refugee from the night before. Richard dropped blueberries into the batter, forming a smiley face. "My wife used to say pancakes taste better when they're happy," he explained, feeling a bit foolish but warming to the child's small smile. While the pancakes cooked, he pressed his phone to his ear, waiting for Marjorie to pick up. His longtime attorney and friend answered on the second ring. "Richard, I've been expecting your call. The police briefed me last night." "Marjorie, I need your help figuring this out. The photograph, the note. There's something here that doesn't add up." He could hear papers shuffling on her end. "I agree. And Richard, I hate to say this, but we need to consider all possibilities. I suggest we arrange for a DNA test, for peace of mind if nothing else." Richard glanced at Amara, who was now carefully arranging her napkin and silverware. "You think she might be? The timing fits with Elaine's disappearance, And that photograph, we need to know, Richard. He flipped the pancake, watching it turn golden brown. I'll take her to the hospital today. Social services already wants her checked out. After ending the call, Richard plated the pancakes, adding a swirl of whipped cream and extra berries. Amara's eyes widened at the elaborate presentation. It looks too pretty to eat, she said, but picked up her fork anyway. Richard sat beside her with his own plate, watching as she took careful, measured bites. Everything about her seemed careful, controlled, except when she forgot herself and let out a small giggle at the whipped cream mustache she'd acquired. The sound of her laughter echoed through the usually silent halls, bouncing off marble floors and high ceilings. It transformed the space, making it feel warmer, more alive. Richard found himself smiling more than he had in years. After breakfast, they drove to Atlanta General Hospital in Richard's Mercedes, a social worker following in her own car. Amara pressed her face against the window, watching the city roll by. "Mr. Rich," she said suddenly, using the nickname she'd created. "Will it hurt? The tests?" "Just a little pinch," he assured her. "Like a bee sting, but faster. And afterward, we can stop for ice cream if you'd like." The hospital waiting room was bright and cheerful, its walls decorated with cartoon characters. While they waited, Richard found a coloring book and crayons at the children's station. Amara settled cross-legged in a chair, balancing the book on her knees. Her small hands moved deliberately across the page, choosing colors with care. Richard watched as a scene emerged, a family holding hands, standing beneath a cross. The figures were surprisingly well drawn for a child her age. "Is that your family?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "It's just a nice picture. I like drawing families." She paused, adding careful rays of sunlight around the cross. "Do you pray, Mr. Rich?" The question caught him off guard. He used to pray daily, but since Elaine, "I haven't in a while," he admitted. Amara nodded sagely. "Sometimes God feels far away, but Mama said he's always listening, even when we're quiet." Richard felt something stir in his chest, a familiar reflex he thought he'd lost. As Amara returned to her drawing, he found himself forming words he hadn't spoken in years. "Lord, please, guide us through this." The tests themselves were quick. Blood draws and cheek swabs that made Amara wrinkle her nose but didn't draw tears. She was brave through it all, holding Richard's hand only during the blood draw. But the hardest part came that evening. The social worker, Ms. Thompson, arrived to take Amara to a temporary foster home while they waited for results and sorted out her situation. "It's just for a little while," Ms. Thompson explained kindly. "The Harrises are wonderful people who take special care of children in transition." Amara stood in the foyer, clutching her backpack, now containing new clothes and her coloring book. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "Don't forget me, Mr. Rich," she whispered as she hugged him goodbye. Richard knelt down to her level. "That would be impossible, Amara. I'll see you very soon." He stood in the doorway, watching until the social worker's car disappeared through his gates. The mansion seemed to grow colder with each step he took back inside, the silence no longer peaceful, but oppressive. Her laughter still seemed to echo faintly in the halls, making their emptiness more pronounced. In the kitchen, he found her breakfast plate still in the sink, a single sticky fingerprint on its edge. Such a small thing, but it brought home how quickly she had filled spaces he didn't even know were empty. Mrs. Chen appeared silently at his elbow. "Shall I clear these away, Mr. Cole?" "No," he said quietly. "Leave them for now." He wasn't ready to erase the evidence that for one brief morning, his house had felt like a home again. Richard Cole sat in his home office, morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. His mahogany desk, usually covered in contracts and business proposals, held only a single manila envelope from Atlanta General Hospital's laboratory services. The envelope had arrived 10 minutes ago. It lay unopened, taunting him. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the letter opener, a silver one Elaine had given him on their 15th anniversary. The metal felt cool against his palm as he sliced through the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, crisp and official, with the hospital's letterhead. His eyes scanned the medical terminology until they found what they were looking for. Probability of paternity? 99.9%, 99.9%. The alleged father, Richard Cole, cannot be excluded as the biological father of the child, Amara Jackson. The paper slipped from his trembling fingers, floating to the desk's polished surface. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, the room suddenly spinning. He pressed his palms against his eyes, memories flooding back unbidden. 5 years ago, Elaine had announced she needed treatment abroad. She'd been different in the months before, distant, distracted. He'd attributed it to their loss, the miscarriage that had nearly broken them both. But now... Oh, Elaine, he whispered to the empty room. Why didn't you tell me? The intercom buzzed, startling him from his thoughts. Mr. Cole? His secretary's voice crackled through. Ms. Lee is here for your 10 o'clock. Send her in, Sarah. He quickly gathered the scattered papers, trying to compose himself. Marjorie Lee entered with her usual brisk efficiency, leather briefcase in hand. One look at Richard's face made her stop short. The results came? She said. It wasn't a question. Richard nodded, unable to speak. He handed her the report. Marjorie adjusted her reading glasses, scanning the document. Her expression remained neutral, but Richard had known her long enough to catch the slight tightening around her eyes. Well, she said finally, settling into one of the chairs across from his desk. This changes everything. She's my daughter, Marjorie. Richard's voice cracked on the word. My daughter, all this time. Richard. Marjorie's tone was gentle but firm. Before we proceed, you need to understand something. This DNA test proves biological relation, but legally it's just the beginning. She pulled out her tablet, fingers moving swiftly across the screen. According to the preliminary investigation, Amara's stepfather, Marcus Jackson, has legal guardianship. He adopted her when he married her mother, Tanya, 3 years ago. The adoption was properly processed and filed. But he's abusing her! Richard's fist came down on the desk. She ran to me, terrified of him. Doesn't that matter? Of course it matters, Marjorie said. But we'll need proof, documentation, medical records, witness statements. And even then, overturning an established adoption isn't simple. The courts generally favor maintaining stability in a child's life. Stability. Richard stood, pacing to the window. Below, Atlanta sprawled out before him, a maze of buildings and streets where somewhere his daughter was staying with strangers. You call living in fear stability? No, Marjorie said quietly. I don't, but we need to approach this carefully, Richard. One wrong move could make things worse for Amara. She opened her briefcase, pulling out several folders. I've already started gathering resources. Family law specialists, child psychologists, private investigators with experience in abuse cases. We'll build our case methodically. Richard barely heard her. His mind was racing through the years, putting pieces together. Elaine's sudden departure, her letters growing shorter and more distant, the way she'd changed in those final months before. I failed them both, he whispered. Richard. Marjorie's voice cut through his self-recrimination. Look at me. He turned from the window. Marjorie had risen from her chair, her expression fierce. You didn't know. You couldn't have known. But what matters now is what you do next. That little girl needs someone in her corner, someone with the resources and determination to protect her. Are you that person? The city lights flickered below as evening approached, each one representing a home, a family, a life. Somewhere out there was a little girl who shared his blood, who had his wife's gentle spirit, who had found her way to him through what could only be divine intervention. Richard moved to his desk and picked up the DNA results again, running his finger over the numbers that had changed everything. God, he whispered, is this my second chance? The answer felt crystal clear in his heart. He turned to Marjorie, his voice steady now. Get your team together. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, I'm going to protect my daughter. Marjorie nodded, already reaching for her phone. I'll set up a strategy meeting for tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock? Make it 7, Richard said. He looked once more at the city spread out before him, but now instead of seeing buildings and streets, he saw possibility. A future. A family. We don't have a moment to waste. The morning sun cast long shadows across the foster home's neat front lawn as Richard Cole stepped out of his Mercedes, carefully balancing a glossy gift bag in one hand. His heart beat a little faster. He'd spent hours the previous evening selecting just the right presents for Amara. Mrs. Martinez, the foster mother, greeted him at the door with a warm smile. She's been asking about you every hour since she woke up, she said, leading him through the cozy living room where 2 other foster children were playing quietly with blocks. Mr. Rich. Amara's voice rang out as she burst from the kitchen, her braids bouncing. She wore a yellow dress that seemed a size too big, probably borrowed from the foster home's clothing supplies, but her face glowed with joy. Richard knelt down, steadying himself as she crashed into his arms. The familiar scent of strawberry shampoo, the same brand Elaine used to use, wrapped around him like a memory. I brought you something, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He handed her the bag, watching as her small fingers carefully pulled out the tissue paper. First came the stuffed lion, golden-maned and soft as clouds. Amara's eyes widened as she hugged it close. He looks just like Aslan, she exclaimed, referring to the character from the Chronicles of Narnia, another echo of Elaine, who had loved those books. There's more, Richard prompted gently. She reached in again and pulled out a white leather Bible, its cover embossed in elegant gold script. Amara Jackson. Her fingers traced the letters reverently. Open it, he encouraged. Inside, he'd written a message. To my dear Amara, may God's love guide and protect you always. With love, Richard. He'd debated signing it Dad, but decided it was too soon, too presumptuous. It's beautiful, she whispered, clutching both gifts to her chest. Thank you, Mr. Rich. Mrs. Martinez discreetly wiped her eyes. Why don't you show Mr. Cole your drawings, Amara, the ones you made yesterday? Amara brightened, grabbing Richard's hand. Come see. She led him to a small table in the corner where several pieces of paper lay scattered. Richard sat in a child-sized chair, his knees nearly touching his chest, but he didn't mind the discomfort. Amara showed him picture after picture, stick figures holding hands, houses with smoke curling from chimneys, and surprisingly detailed flowers. This is my mommy, she said softly, pointing to one drawing. She used to sing me to sleep every night. Amazing Grace was her favorite. Richard's breath caught. Elaine had sung that hymn constantly, her clear voice floating through their home as she worked or cooked or simply sat in her favorite reading chair. Did she... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Did she sing any other songs? Amara nodded enthusiastically. She loved the butterfly song. If I were a butterfly, I'd thank you, Lord, for giving me wings. She sang quietly, doing the hand motions that went with it. Richard had to look away, remembering Elaine teaching that same song to their Sunday school class years ago. The pieces were falling into place like a divine puzzle, each revelation both painful and precious. "Mr. Rich." Amara's small hand touched his cheek. "Are you crying?" He hadn't even noticed the tears. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they are happy," he explained, pulling her into a gentle hug. "I'm not going anywhere this time, sweetheart, I promise." They spent the next hour looking through her drawings and reading from her new Bible. Richard noticed she had trouble with some of the longer words, making a mental note to look into tutoring options once, when she came home with him. When it was time to leave, Amara clung to him a little tighter than usual. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he assured her, using one of Elaine's favorite phrases. Back in his car, Richard called Marjorie. "How's the custody proceeding going?" "Moving as fast as we can," his lawyer replied. "We've filed the initial paperwork and requested an emergency hearing based on the abuse allegations. The social workers' reports are helping our case." "Good. Keep pushing. And Marjorie, I need a contractor, the best in Atlanta, someone who can work quickly and discreetly." "For what project?" "I'm converting the East guest room into a bedroom for Amara." That evening, Richard stood in the empty guest room, imagining the transformation. The space was generous, with large windows overlooking his carefully tended garden. The afternoon light painted golden rectangles on the cream-colored walls that would soon be a different color. The contractor, recommended by Marjorie, arrived within the hour. Mike Stevens had a reputation for high-end residential work, and more importantly, understood the need for speed and privacy. "We're thinking pink," Richard explained, showing him the shade samples he'd selected. Soft, not too bright, like sunset clouds. Mike nodded, making notes. "We can do a feature wall with delicate butterflies stenciled in metallic gold. Kids love that kind of detail." They walked through the space, discussing changes. Custom built-in bookshelves would line one wall, perfect for storing treasured volumes and displaying art projects. A window seat with storage underneath would provide a cozy reading nook. "The curtains are crucial," Richard insisted, showing Mike the ethereal pink fabric he'd chosen. "They need to catch the light just right, create a sort of magical feeling." "We can layer them," Mike suggested. "Sheer panels behind, heavier drapes that can be drawn for privacy. And what about fairy lights? We can install them around the ceiling perimeter, controlled by a dimmer switch." Richard smiled, remembering how Amara's eyes had lit up at the twinkling Christmas display in the foster home's living room. "Perfect." They discussed other details: soft carpeting to replace the hardwood, a custom desk for homework, a dress-up corner with a full-length mirror, and a display space for her artwork. Everything would be top quality but chosen with a child's comfort in mind. "We can have it done in 3 days," Mike promised, "working round the clock if necessary." "Money's no object," Richard said. "Just make it perfect." After the contractor left, Richard stood alone in the room again. The space seemed to hum with possibility, with hope. He could almost hear the echo of future laughter, see phantom crayon drawings stuck to the fridge downstairs, imagine the patter of small feet running down the hallway. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photo he'd taken of Amara that afternoon, her face bright with joy as she hugged her new lion. The image blurred as tears filled his eyes again. "You knew, didn't you, Elaine?" he whispered to the empty room. "You were protecting her all along." The mystery of those final years, Elaine's distant behavior, her sudden trip abroad, her letters that said both too much and too little, was slowly unraveling. She must have discovered she was pregnant after the miscarriage, must have realized what a miracle it was. But why hide it? What had she feared? Richard shook his head, pushing the questions aside for now. The past would reveal its secrets in time. Right now, his focus needed to be on the future, on creating a safe, loving home for the daughter he'd just discovered. He walked to the window and looked out at the garden below. The rose bushes Elaine had planted were blooming, their pink petals catching the last rays of sunset. Soon, very soon, he hoped, a little girl would look out these same windows, drawing pictures of the flowers and filling this empty house with life again. The room would be ready. The home would be ready. And most importantly, his heart was ready. Ready to love, ready to protect, ready to be the father Amara deserved. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Marjorie Lee's downtown law office as Richard sat across from her mahogany desk, his fingers drumming anxiously on the armrest. "We've filed for emergency custody," Marjorie explained, adjusting her reading glasses. "Given the evidence of abuse and your DNA confirmation, we have a strong case." "But Richard—" She paused, her expression grave. "There's been a development." Richard's stomach tightened. "What kind of development?" "Amara's stepfather has retained counsel. Daryl Jackson. He's making quite a bit of noise already." As if on cue, Marjorie's computer chimed with a news alert. She turned the screen so Richard could see the headline. "Billionaire claims hidden daughter. Scandal or miracle?" Richard's jaw clenched. "They're already running stories?" "Jackson went to the press himself," Marjorie said, her tone bitter. "He's painting himself as the victim, a hard-working father whose child is being stolen by a wealthy white man throwing money around." Richard stood, pacing the office. The Atlanta skyline stretched beyond the windows, a view he usually found calming. Not today. "He's the one who hurt her. She ran to me terrified of him." "I know that, and we have documentation from the social workers. But Jackson's smart. He's playing to public sympathy, claiming Amara made up stories because you promised her a fancy life." Richard's phone buzzed. Another news alert. Another headline. "Class warfare in custody battle. Billionaire versus working father." "I don't care about the headlines," Richard said firmly. "I care about keeping my daughter safe." Marjorie nodded, pulling out a thick folder. "Then let's prepare. Jackson's going to fight dirty. He's already given interviews claiming you're using your wealth to manipulate the system." They spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents, preparing responses, and strategizing. Richard's head was spinning with legal terms and procedures, but one thing remained crystal clear. He would not back down. When he left Marjorie's office, reporters were waiting outside the building. Camera flashes exploded as he pushed through them, ignoring their shouted questions. "Mr. Cole, did you abandon your daughter? Was this a secret affair? Are you trying to buy this child?" His driver had the car door open, and Richard ducked inside, his heart pounding. As they pulled away, he closed his eyes, remembering Elaine's favorite psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." That evening, alone in his study, Richard pulled out Elaine's old Bible. The leather was worn soft from years of use, the pages marked with her neat annotations. He found himself turning to the Psalms she'd loved most, seeking comfort in the familiar words. Psalm 27 jumped out at him. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" His phone rang. Marjorie again. "Jackson's given another interview. He's claiming Elaine was unstable, that she hid the pregnancy because of mental health issues. Richard, he's trying to dirty her name to strengthen his case." Richard's free hand curled into a fist. "He never even knew her. How dare he? We need to be prepared for more attacks. This is going to get uglier before it gets better." After hanging up, Richard sat in the growing darkness of his study. The city lights twinkled below, but they offered no comfort tonight. He found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, praying out loud. God, I don't understand why this is happening now, why Elaine kept this secret, but please, please help me protect Amara. The next morning, he visited Amara at the foster home. She was drawing at a small table, and her face lit up when she saw him. But there was something different in her eyes, a shadow of worry. "Mr. Rich," she asked softly, "I saw your picture on TV. Are you scared?" Richard sat down beside her, his heart aching at her perceptiveness. He thought about lying, about pretending everything was fine. But she deserved better than that. "A little," he admitted with a gentle smile. "But you know what? Brave people do what's right, even when they're scared." Amara nodded solemnly, then pushed her drawing toward him. It showed two figures holding hands under a bright sun. "That's us," she explained. "And look, no rain clouds." Richard blinked back tears, touched by the simple hope in her artwork. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." "Are they going to make me go back to him?" Her voice trembled slightly. "No," Richard said firmly, though his heart clenched at the fear in her eyes. "I promise I'm doing everything I can to keep you safe." They spent the next hour drawing together, Richard trying to match her careful crayon strokes as she taught him how to draw flowers and butterflies. The foster mother, Mrs. Chen, brought them cookies and milk, her kind face showing concern as she glanced at the TV news running silently in the next room. When it was time to leave, Amara hugged him tightly. "Don't let the mean people on TV make you sad, Mr. Rich. Jesus still loves us." Richard's throat tightened at her words, so much like something Elaine would have said. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're very wise." Back in his car, his driver navigated through another crowd of reporters. Their shouts followed him. "Mr. Cole, how much are you paying to buy this child?" Richard's hands shook as he pulled out his phone to call Marjorie. "We need to do something about these vultures. They're frightening Amara." "I'm already working on a restraining order to keep them away from the foster home," Marjorie assured him. "And, Richard, we've got a hearing date, 3 days from now." "So soon." The evidence of abuse helped expedite things. But be prepared. Jackson will be there, and he's going to put on quite a show. That night, Richard stood in the newly finished bedroom he'd had prepared for Amara. The soft pink walls glowed in the fairy lights, and the window seat looked perfect for reading stories together. He'd filled the bookshelf with children's classics and Bible stories, waiting for the day she could call this room her own. His phone buzzed with another news alert. Custody battle exposes class divide, wealthy executive versus working class father. Richard set the phone aside and picked up Elaine's Bible again, finding comfort in its worn pages. As he read, he could almost hear her voice, gentle but strong. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." "I'm trying, my love," he whispered. "I'm trying to understand why you kept her secret, why you didn't trust me. But I promise you, I'll protect her now, whatever it takes." Outside his window, camera flashes occasionally lit up the darkness, as persistent photographers tried to get shots of his home. But inside, in this room prepared with love, Richard found a moment of peace. The battle ahead would be hard, but he knew in his heart it was right. He thought of Amara's drawing. 2 figures in the sunshine, no rain clouds in sight. Sometimes the greatest wisdom came from the simplest sources. With renewed determination, he began preparing for the hearing, ready to fight for the daughter he'd just found, no matter what storms lay ahead. The social worker's silver Toyota pulled up to Richard's mansion on a bright Thursday morning. Ms. Cora Jefferson stood beside Richard on the front steps, both of them watching as Amara emerged from the car, her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Now remember," the social worker, Mrs. Thompson, said as she guided Amara forward. "This is just a supervised visit. 4 hours today." Richard nodded, but his attention was fixed on Amara's beaming face. The girl practically skipped up the marble steps, her braids swinging. "Welcome back, sugar," Ms. Cora said warmly, opening her arms. Amara rushed into them, breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla and fresh-baked cookies that seemed to follow the housekeeper everywhere. "I made your favorite snacks," Ms. Cora continued, leading them inside. "Those peanut butter cookies you liked so much last time." The mansion's grand foyer, once eerily quiet, now echoed with Amara's footsteps and delighted gasps. She'd been here several times over the past week for supervised visits, and each time the cold marble walls seemed to warm with her presence. "Mr. Rich," Amara tugged at Richard's sleeve. "Can I show Mrs. Thompson my drawings, the ones you put up?" Richard smiled, gesturing to the formerly austere hallway. Where there had once been expensive art prints, children's drawings now decorated the walls, carefully taped at a 9-year-old's eye level. Butterflies, rainbows, and stick-figure families smiled from bright construction paper. "My goodness," Mrs. Thompson said, adjusting her glasses. "You've been busy, Amara." "Show her the piano, sweet pea," Ms. Cora suggested, and Amara's face lit up even more. They moved to the formal living room, where the grand piano sat by floor-to-ceiling windows. Sunlight streamed across its polished surface, and sheet music lay neatly arranged on the bench. "Mr. Rich is teaching me," Amara announced proudly, climbing onto the bench. Her small fingers found the keys, and she carefully picked out "Jesus Loves Me," the simple melody filling the room. Richard watched her play, remembering how Elaine used to sit at this same piano, filling the house with hymns and classical pieces. The memory didn't hurt as much anymore. Instead, it felt like a bridge between past and present. "Very nice, Amara," Mrs. Thompson praised when she finished. "I see you're settling in well during your visits." Ms. Cora appeared with a tray of cookies and milk, setting them on the coffee table. "Come get your snack, child. Can't play piano on an empty stomach." As they settled into their snack, Richard noticed Amara's eyes kept drifting to the grandfather clock in the corner. She was counting the hours, he realized, knowing their time together was limited. "Would you like to see something special?" he asked, trying to distract her. "I have a surprise upstairs." With Mrs. Thompson's approval, they climbed to the second floor. Richard opened a door, revealing a room transformed. Gone was the stark guest room. In its place was a little girl's paradise. Soft pink walls glowed in the afternoon light. Fairy lights twinkled along the ceiling, and a window seat was piled with cushions perfect for reading. Is this for me?" Amara whispered, her eyes wide. "Someday," Richard said carefully, mindful of Mrs. Thompson's presence. "When everything's sorted out." Amara walked around the room, touching everything gently. The white bookshelf filled with children's books, the desk with brand-new art supplies, the soft rug perfect for playing. "Look at the view," Richard suggested, leading her to the window seat. Below, Ms. Cora's garden bloomed with late summer flowers. "I thought you might like to read here." "Can we?" Amara asked hopefully. "Right now." Richard selected a book from the shelf, a collection of bedtime stories Elaine used to read to her Sunday school students. They settled into the window seat, Amara curled against his side, Mrs. Thompson discreetly observing from a chair near the door. As Richard read about talking animals and magical gardens, he felt Amara relax against him. Her small hand found his, and she held on tight, as if afraid he might disappear. The afternoon passed too quickly. When it was time for the bedtime story, Amara knelt beside her temporary bed, folding her hands carefully. "Dear Jesus," she began, her voice clear and sweet. "Thank you for cookies and piano lessons and my new room. Thank you for Ms. Cora's hugs and for giving me a new daddy who reads stories. Please keep Mr. Rich safe from the mean people on TV and help him not to be scared. Amen. Richard's heart seemed to crack and mend all at once. He blinked back tears, touching her braided hair gently. That was a beautiful prayer, sweetheart. Later, after Amara and Mrs. Thompson had left, Richard sat at the piano, his fingers resting on the keys where Amara's had been. Ms. Cora found him there, lost in thought. That child's brought the light back to this house, she said softly, beginning to tidy up the cookie crumbs, just like her mama used to. Richard looked up sharply. Did you know about Elaine and Amara? Ms. Cora shook her head. Not everything. But I knew something was eating at Miss Elaine those last months. She spent hours at this piano, playing hymns and crying when she thought no one could hear. Richard's fingers brushed the piano bench, and he felt something odd, a slight unevenness in the wood. Curious, he lifted the seat. There, in a hidden compartment, lay a small leather-bound book, Elaine's diary. With trembling hands, Richard opened it. Pages of Elaine's elegant handwriting filled his vision. He began to read, Ms. Cora sitting quietly beside him. March 15th. I've discovered something terrible about Daryl. The bruises on Sarah's arms weren't from falling. How many other women has he hurt? I can't let him find out about the baby. God forgive me, but I have to protect this child. The entries continued, documenting Elaine's discovery of Daryl's violent past, her fear for her unborn child, her agonizing decision to flee. The final entry brought fresh tears to Richard's eyes. If he ever finds us, tell Richard I did this for love. Tell him I couldn't bear to put him in danger, to watch Daryl destroy another family. My brave, kind husband. I pray someday he'll understand. And to my precious baby, may you find your way back to your father's heart. Richard closed the diary, his hands shaking. Ms. Cora wrapped her arms around him as he wept, for Elaine's sacrifice, for the years lost with his daughter, for the love that had driven his wife to such desperate measures. She was protecting both of you. Ms. Cora said softly. That man's evil, Mr. Richard. Miss Elaine knew it. And now we've got to protect that precious child the same way. Through his tears, Richard nodded. The diary was more than a confession. It was evidence. Evidence of Daryl's true nature, of Elaine's motherly love, of Amara's rightful place in this home. Outside, the garden Elaine had loved so much bloomed in the fading light. Somewhere in that garden, a 9-year-old girl had played today, her laughter echoing off marble walls that no longer felt cold. Richard touched the diary's worn cover, feeling closer to Elaine than he had in years. Thank you, he whispered, though whether to Elaine or God, he wasn't sure. Perhaps both. Thank you for bringing her home. Richard sat in his study, reviewing custody documents with a quiet confidence. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, warming the leather chair where he'd spent countless hours planning Amara's future. Pictures of their supervised visits decorated his desk, Amara at the piano, in the garden, reading stories. Each image reflected the joy she'd brought to his life. His cell phone buzzed. Marjorie's name flashed on the screen. Richard. Her voice carried an unusual tension. We need to talk. In person. Now. Within the hour, Marjorie Lee sat across from him, her usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. She placed a manila folder on his desk with deliberate care. Richard, there's no easy way to say this. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Amara's biological mother is alive. The words hit him like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white. That's impossible. Amara said she believed what she was told. Marjorie interrupted gently. Her name is Tanya Lewis. She's been living under an assumed name in a rehabilitation facility outside Atlanta for the past 8 months. Richard's mind raced back to every conversation with Amara, every detail about her past. How did you find her? She found us. Marjorie opened the folder. She saw the media coverage about Amara. She's been fighting addiction, Richard. After Elaine's death, she spiraled. She was afraid of losing custody to Daryl permanently and… Marjorie hesitated. She was afraid of judgment from your social circle. Richard stared at the photograph in the file. A thin woman with Amara's same deep brown eyes looked back at him. Her face showed the wear of hard years, but beneath the fatigue lay a shadow of beauty. She wants to see her daughter, Marjorie continued, and legally she still has parental rights. Richard stood, pacing the length of his study. Where is she now? The New Hope Recovery Center. She's been clean for 6 months. Marjorie watched him carefully. Richard, I know this complicates things. I want to meet her, he said firmly. The New Hope Recovery Center stood in stark contrast to Richard's world of marble and mahogany. The simple brick building, surrounded by well-tended gardens, spoke of healing rather than luxury. Richard followed a counselor down a sunlit hallway, his heart pounding. They found Tanya in the center's garden, tending to a small patch of flowers. She looked up as they approached, and Richard saw Amara in every feature of her face. Mr. Cole, she said softly, standing. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on her jeans. Thank you for coming. They sat on a wooden bench, the late morning sun warming their shoulders. For a long moment, neither spoke. I'm sorry, Tanya finally said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry for everything. Richard studied her face, the deep fatigue, the hints of recent tears, the desperate hope in her eyes. Tell me what happened, he said gently. Tanya's story spilled out in broken pieces. How Elaine had been her mentor at a women's shelter, helping her escape Daryl's abuse. How they'd planned together to protect Amara. How Elaine's sudden death had left her alone and terrified. When I lost Elaine, I lost my anchor, she whispered. Daryl found us. He threatened to take Amara. I started using again, just to cope. I thought… She wiped her eyes. I thought if I disappeared, he'd leave her alone. I thought she'd be safer without me. Richard remembered his own grief after Elaine's death, how close he'd come to losing himself. Addiction is a disease, he said quietly. Not a moral failing. Tanya looked at him in surprise, tears streaming down her face. I don't deserve your kindness. You deserve a chance to heal, Richard replied, and Amara deserves to know her mother is fighting to get better. The courts won't give me custody, Tanya said, her voice hollow. Not with my history. Let me help you, Richard said, surprising himself with the immediacy of his offer. We can work together, get you the support you need, build a stable environment for Amara. Why would you do that? Tanya asked, bewildered. Because it's what Elaine would have wanted, Richard answered, and because Amara needs both of us. Before they could discuss further details, Richard's phone rang. It was Marjorie again, her voice tight with urgency. The judge reviewed Tanya's file, she said without preamble. Given the circumstances, she's ordering Amara placed in temporary care until Tanya can demonstrate long-term stability. Richard felt the world tilt beneath him. How long? Minimum 90 days. The hearing is tomorrow morning. He looked at Tanya, who seemed to read the news in his expression. She crumpled, covering her face with her hands. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I've ruined everything. Richard moved closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. No, he said firmly. You've taken the hardest step, asking for help. Now we fight together, for Amara. They spent the next hour talking with Tanya's counselor, developing a comprehensive plan for her continued recovery. Richard committed to funding whatever additional treatment she needed, arranging for legal representation to protect her rights while she focused on healing. As the sun began to set, Richard stood to leave. Tanya caught his hand. "Why are you being so kind?" she asked again. "You could fight me for custody, use your money and influence." "Because I've learned something from Amara," he interrupted gently. "Love isn't about winning or losing. It's about healing." Driving home through Atlanta's evening traffic, Richard's heart felt heavy with the weight of the day's revelations. He thought of Amara, how she'd have to face another transition, another uncertainty. Yet beneath his worry lay a strange hope. Perhaps this wasn't an ending, but a beginning, a chance for complete healing, not just for Amara, but for all of them. His phone buzzed with a text from Marjorie. "Court tomorrow, 9 a.m., bringing documents for both you and Tanya to sign. We'll get through this." Richard touched the photo of Amara on his dashboard and whispered a prayer, not for victory this time, but for wisdom, for healing, for grace to help build something new from the ashes of the past. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing warmly in the dusk. Soon he would have to tell Amara about her mother, about the temporary separation. But tonight he would hold on to hope, hope that sometimes the hardest truths could lead to the deepest healing. Ms. Cora met him at the door, concern etched on her face. "Hard day?" she asked softly. Richard nodded, too emotionally drained for words. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she said, patting his arm. "But he never works without purpose." Richard headed to his study, where Elaine's diary still lay open on his desk. His wife's words seemed to reach across time. "Love is patient, love is kind. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight Richard chose to believe that love, in all its messy, complicated forms, would be enough to see them through. Richard Cole stared at the morning newspaper spread across his mahogany desk, his coffee growing cold beside it. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Billionaire's secret child drama deepens, questions of ethics and money." Below it, a photo showed him rushing from the courthouse, his hand raised to block photographers, making him look guilty, defensive. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution article painted him as a manipulative tycoon trying to buy a child's affection. They dug up old business rivals who claimed he'd strong-armed them in deals, suggesting this was just another power play. Worse, they'd somehow gotten hold of details about Elaine's death, twisting his grief-driven withdrawal from society into something sinister. His phone buzzed, another sponsor pulling out of his annual charity gala. "Mr. Cole," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Davidson Industries is cancelling our development contract. They cite public relations concerns." Richard pressed his fingers to his temples. That was the third major deal this week. The empire he'd built over 4 decades was showing cracks, all because he'd tried to do the right thing. But none of that pain compared to what waited at the foster home that afternoon. When he arrived for his supervised visit, Amara sat in the corner of the playroom, her back turned to him. Her pink backpack, the one she'd carried that rainy night, lay discarded by her feet. "Hello, sweetheart," he said softly. Amara hunched her shoulders, refusing to look at him. The social worker, Mrs. Thompson, gave him a sympathetic glance. "She's been like this all morning," she whispered. "She saw your picture on TV at breakfast." Richard's heart clenched. He knelt down beside Amara's chair, careful to maintain some distance. "Would you like to tell me what's wrong?" "You promised," Amara whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You said you wouldn't leave me. I haven't left you, sweetheart. I'm right here. She whirled around, her eyes bright with hurt. But they said on TV you only want me 'cause you're rich. They said you buy everything you want. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Amara, that's not true. You know that's not true. Then why can't I come home? Her lower lip trembled. Why do I have to stay here? Richard reached for her, but she scrambled away, retreating to another corner. She pulled her knees to her chest and buried her face in them, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. Mrs. Thompson touched his arm. Maybe we should give her some space today. Richard nodded numbly, his throat tight. As he stood to leave, he noticed Amara's drawings on the wall, the family holding hands under a cross, now torn down the middle. The drive home was a blur. His phone kept buzzing with messages from his PR team, suggesting damage control strategies, but he ignored them all. What good was protecting his image if he couldn't protect the one person who mattered most? At home, the silence felt suffocating. Ms. Cora had left dinner in the warming oven, but he couldn't eat. He wandered through the empty rooms, past the pink bedroom he'd prepared with such hope, past Elaine's piano where Amara had played simple tunes just days ago. More sponsors withdrew over the next few days. The charitable foundation he'd established in Elaine's memory lost half its corporate donors. Old friends stopped returning his calls. The media circus grew worse, with tabloids publishing increasingly sensational stories about his past. But nothing hurt like the silence from Amara. Each supervised visit became more strained. She wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't look at him. She drew pictures only to crumple them up. Once he caught her staring at him, with such confusion and hurt that it nearly broke him. After a particularly difficult visit, Richard retreated to his mansion. He'd always viewed its size as a symbol of success. Now its emptiness mocked him. He walked past the security cameras, past the imported marble floors, past all the trappings of wealth that suddenly meant nothing. In his study, he found himself looking at old photographs. Elaine at their wedding. Elaine in the garden she'd loved. Elaine with that secret smile that had always meant she knew something he didn't. Would she be disappointed in him now? The weight of everything, the media attacks, the business losses, Amara's rejection, crashed over him. For the first time since Elaine's death, Richard Cole fell to his knees. Lord, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, I don't care about the money anymore. I don't care what they say about me in the papers. I just want to be the father she needs, the father she remembers as safe. Tears fell freely now, spotting his expensive suit pants. If this is your will, if this is the path you've chosen, give me strength to walk it, not for my sake, but for hers. His prayer echoed in the empty room. Outside, camera flashes occasionally lit up the night as paparazzi hoped to catch a glimpse of the controversial billionaire. But Richard stayed on his knees, praying with a conviction he hadn't felt in years. He prayed for Amara's heart to heal. He prayed for Tanya's recovery. He prayed for wisdom to navigate the storm without losing sight of what truly mattered. When he finally stood, his knees aching from the hard floor, something had shifted inside him. The mansion's silence no longer felt like a burden, but like a pause, a holy moment between what was and what could be. His phone buzzed again. Another headline, Cole Empire crumbling amid custody battle. He turned the phone face down without reading it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attacks, new wounds. But tonight, he had found something money couldn't buy, the courage to keep loving, even when it hurt. Richard Cole sat in his parked Mercedes outside the Riverside Recovery Center, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The brick building looked nothing like he'd imagined, warm and inviting rather than cold and clinical, with flower beds brightening the entrance. Still, his heart pounded as if he were facing another hostile boardroom. This visit wasn't about business, though. It was about healing. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, straightening his navy tie more out of habit than necessity. The past weeks had carved new lines around his eyes, and his salt and pepper hair needed a trim. But it was his expression that had changed the most. Humbled, perhaps, or just tired of fighting. "Lord, give me wisdom," he whispered, a prayer that had become familiar lately. Inside, the reception area smelled of coffee and lavender. A young woman at the desk smiled warmly. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Lewis is expecting you." He followed a counselor down a sunlit hallway, past community rooms where other residents gathered for group therapy. The walls displayed artwork, expressions of pain and hope, painted by those fighting their own battles. The counselor stopped at a garden room. "She's nervous about this meeting," she said quietly. "But she's been doing really well in her program." Richard nodded, grateful for the insight. Through the glass doors, he could see Tanya Lewis sitting on a bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked different from their brief first meeting. Cleaner, more present, but still fragile. Like a bird ready to take flight at the slightest sound. The counselor opened the door. "Tanya, Mr. Cole is here." Tanya stood quickly, smoothing her simple cotton dress. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was soft but steady. "Thank you for coming." Richard took a seat across from her, noticing how she kept her distance. The garden around them provided a peaceful backdrop. Butterfly bushes, wind chimes, a small fountain bubbling nearby. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. "Better." She managed a small smile. 68 days sober today." "That's wonderful, Tanya, truly." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. A hummingbird darted past, drawing both their attention momentarily. "I know why you're here," Tanya finally said, her fingers twisting together. "You want to take Amara away from me, and after everything I've done, maybe you should." Richard leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "That's not why I'm here at all." She looked up, surprised. "I'm here because we both love the same little girl," he continued. "And I think it's time we stopped fighting and started healing, for her sake." Tears welled in Tanya's eyes. "But the things I did, hiding her from you all these years, were you trying to protect her?" She nodded, wiping her cheeks. "Then we already have something in common." Richard pulled out his handkerchief and offered it to her. "Tanya, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to tell you that when you're ready, when you've completed your program and feel strong enough, I want us to raise Amara together." The handkerchief fell from her trembling hands. "What?" "No shame, no blame. Just two parents doing their best for their daughter." He picked up the handkerchief and returned it to her. "We can figure out the details later, but I want you to be part of her life. You're her mother." Tanya's composure crumbled. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. "I don't deserve this kindness." "It's not about deserving," Richard said quietly. "It's about love and forgiveness." A nurse passing by the garden paused, watching through the glass with tears in her eyes. Other residents and staff members gradually gathered, drawn by the powerful scene unfolding. Richard continued, his own voice thick with emotion. "Amara needs both of us. She needs your strength, your love, and I promise you, I'll do everything in my power to support your recovery." Tanya lowered her hands, revealing red-rimmed eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. "You mean that?" "Every word." She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Then I'll testify. I'll tell the judge everything about Daryl's abuse, about why I ran. Whatever it takes to keep her safe." Richard felt a weight lift from his chest. "Thank you." Elaine. Tanya's voice caught. Elaine would be proud of you right now. She always said you had a heart too big for your own good. The words hit him like a physical touch. For the first time in months, a genuine smile spread across Richard's face. You knew her well? She was my teacher back in high school. Then later, when things got bad with Daryl, she helped me escape. Gave me money, contacts. Tanya's expression softened with memory. She never stopped believing in second chances. The garden seemed brighter somehow, as if Elaine's spirit had blessed their reconciliation. Through the glass doors, several staff members were openly crying, touched by the scene they'd witnessed. We should work with your counselors. Richard said, make a plan for transition once you're ready. Whatever support you need, therapy, housing, job training, consider it done. Why? Tanya asked, wonder in her voice. Why would you do all this? Because it's what Elaine would have wanted, and because Amara deserves to know her mother's strength, not just her struggles. They talked for another hour, planning and healing, while the fountain bubbled and wind chimes sang. When it was time to leave, Tanya walked him to the door, standing straighter than before. Mr. Cole? She called as he turned to go. Thank you, not just for forgiving me, but for showing me what real love looks like. Richard nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. As he walked to his car, he felt Elaine's presence stronger than ever, in the gentle breeze, in the way the sunlight caught the flowers, in the peace that filled his heart. The smile stayed with him all the way home. It wasn't a victory smile, or even a happy one exactly. It was the smile of a man who had finally understood that love was bigger than anger, bigger than pride, bigger than pain. It was the smile Elaine had always loved best. The Atlanta County Courthouse buzzed with tension on that crisp autumn morning. Television vans crowded the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching towards the sky like metal flowers. Inside courtroom 3, every wooden bench creaked under the weight of reporters, their notebooks poised and ready. Richard Cole sat at the plaintiff's table, his charcoal suit pristine, but his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His attorney, Marjorie Lee, arranged documents with practiced precision while whispering last-minute reassurances. Across the aisle, Daryl Jackson lounged in his chair, wearing what looked like a brand-new suit that didn't quite fit, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The door opened, and a court officer led Tanya Lewis to her seat. She looked different from the broken woman Richard had first met at the rehabilitation center. Today she held her head high, though her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. She wore a modest blue dress, her hair neatly pulled back, and when she caught Richard's eye, she gave him a small, determined nod. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. "The Honorable Judge Miriam Hayes presiding." Judge Hayes swept in, her black robes flowing behind her as she took her seat. Her dark eyes surveyed the packed courtroom with practiced neutrality. "Be seated," she commanded, her voice carrying authority earned through decades on the bench. "We're here today in the matter of custody for minor child Amara Jackson," Judge Hayes began, shuffling through her papers. "I understand we have multiple parties seeking custody. Let's begin with the respondent's case." Daryl's attorney, a young man in an ill-fitting suit, stood up. "Your Honor, my client is the legal guardian of Amara Jackson. He's raised her for 9 years, provided for her needs, and maintained a stable home. Mr. Jackson is a hard-working citizen who beat his stepdaughter and terrorized his wife." Marjorie interrupted, rising to her feet. "Your Honor, we have documentation." "You'll have your turn, Counselor," Judge Hayes warned, though her eyes narrowed slightly at Daryl. Daryl's attorney called him to the stand. As he was sworn in, Richard noticed how Daryl's entire demeanor changed. His swagger disappeared, replaced by an expression of wounded dignity. "Mr. Jackson," his attorney began, Please tell the court about your relationship with Amara." Daryl leaned forward, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "I've loved that little girl since she was born, treated her like my own flesh and blood. We might not have much, but we've got love." He turned to face the reporters directly. Then this billionaire shows up out of nowhere, thinking he can buy himself a daughter, using his white privilege and guilt money to tear apart a black family. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Several reporters scribbled frantically. "Objection, Your Honor," Marjorie called out. "The witness is grandstanding." "Sustained," Judge Hayes said sharply. "Mr. Jackson, direct your comments to the court." But Daryl had achieved his goal. The reporters were already crafting their headlines, and he knew it. He continued his testimony, painting himself as a devoted stepfather, while subtly implying that Richard's wealth made him somehow less worthy of raising Amara. When it was Marjorie's turn for cross-examination, she approached with careful precision. "Mr. Jackson, are you aware that DNA testing has confirmed that Mr. Cole is Amara's biological father?" "Papers can be bought," Daryl sneered. "And what about these hospital records?" Marjorie held up a file, documenting 6 separate emergency room visits for Amara in the past 3 years. Suspicious bruising, a broken arm, multiple contusions. Kids fall down, they play rough. Daryl countered, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. "And these police reports, 3 domestic violence calls to your residence in the past year alone?" "Objection!" Daryl's attorney jumped up. "These allegations are unfounded. No charges were filed." "Because he threatened to kill me if I pressed charges." A clear voice rang out from the gallery. All heads turned to see Tanya standing, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Judge Hayes leaned forward. "Ms. Lewis, while I appreciate your candor, you'll have your opportunity to testify." "Your Honor," Marjorie said, "we'd like to call Tanya Lewis to the stand now." As Tanya walked to the witness box, Richard could see her trembling, but when she raised her right hand to be sworn in, her "I do" rang clear and true. "Ms. Lewis," Marjorie began gently, "please tell the court about your relationship with Daryl Jackson." Tanya took a deep breath. "I met Daryl when I was young and vulnerable. He seemed kind at first, but then the abuse started. Small things at first. Pushing, name-calling. Then it got worse." Her voice cracked. "I was too scared to leave. He said he'd kill me if I tried to take Amara." "And why didn't you reach out to Mr. Cole when Amara was born?" "I was ashamed," Tanya admitted, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And scared. Elaine, Mrs. Cole, she helped me escape once, but Daryl found us. After she died, I felt so alone. I turned to drugs to cope, and that's my biggest regret. I failed my daughter, and I have to live with that." The courtroom was silent now, every eye fixed on Tanya as she continued. "But I'm getting better. I'm clean now, 4 months sober. I'm working my program, going to therapy, and I see how Mr. Cole loves Amara. Not because of money or guilt, but because she's his daughter. He's even helped me get treatment, offered me a chance to be part of her life again." Marjorie approached the bench with a leather-bound book. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter this into evidence. This is the diary of Elaine Cole, discovered recently in her personal effects. It details her knowledge of Amara's existence and her efforts to protect both mother and child from Mr. Jackson's abuse." As the judge read through the diary, Richard watched Daryl's face darken. The mask of wounded dignity was slipping, revealing glimpses of the anger beneath. "Finally, Your Honor," Marjorie said, "we have one more piece of evidence." She withdrew a child's drawing from her briefcase. This was created by Amara during one of her supervised visits with Mr. Cole. The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a cross: a tall man in a suit, a woman with a gentle smile, and a little girl between them. Written in careful child's handwriting were the words, "God put us together." The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the reporters stopped writing. Judge Hayes studied the drawing for a long moment, then looked up at the assembled parties. Her expression had softened slightly. "I've seen many custody cases in my years on the bench," she began. "Too often, they become about the adult's desires rather than the child's needs. But today, I see something different." She turned to face Richard. "Mr. Cole, you've demonstrated not only your biological connection to Amara, but also your commitment to her well-being. More importantly, you've shown wisdom in supporting Ms. Lewis's recovery and recognizing the importance of maintaining that mother-child bond." To Tanya, she said, "Ms. Lewis, your courage in confronting your past and working to better yourself is commendable. Your honesty about your failures and your dedication to recovery speak well of your character." Finally, she fixed Darryl with a stern gaze. "Mr. Jackson, your attempts to manipulate this court and the media are transparent. The evidence of abuse is compelling, and your behavior today has only reinforced the concerns about your fitness as a guardian." Judge Hayes straightened her papers. "It is the finding of this court that primary custody of Amara Jackson, henceforth to be legally known as Amara Cole, will be granted to Richard Cole. Miss Lewis will retain visitation rights, to be supervised initially and expanded as she progresses in her recovery. Mr. Jackson's parental rights are hereby terminated." Darryl leaped to his feet. "This is racism. Pure and simple. You can't—" "One more word," Judge Hayes warned, "and you'll be held in contempt. Court officers, please escort Mr. Jackson from the building." As Darryl was led away, still protesting, Richard felt tears of relief sliding down his cheeks. Tanya came to stand beside him, and without thinking, he took her hand. Together they faced the future that God had somehow arranged, not as enemies or rivals, but as partners in raising the daughter they both loved. The reporters surged forward with questions, but Richard and Tanya simply smiled and walked out together, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. Outside the courthouse, the autumn sun seemed brighter somehow, as if reflecting the miracle they had just witnessed. The miracle of love triumphing over hate, of healing overcoming hurt, of family being born from brokenness. The afternoon sun painted golden streaks across Richard's driveway as his car pulled up to the mansion. In the back seat, Amara sat quietly between Richard and Tanya, her small hands clutching her pink backpack. The same backpack that had started it all, Richard thought, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. As they stepped out of the car, Amara hung back, her eyes wide as she stared up at the grand house. She'd been here before for visits, but this was different. This was forever. Richard noticed her hesitation and knelt down in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "Welcome home, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice warm with love. For a moment, Amara just stood there, as if testing whether this was real or just another dream. Then her face broke into a radiant smile, and she launched herself into Richard's arms. "Really home?" she whispered against his shoulder. "Really home," he assured her, holding her tight. Tanya wiped away tears as she watched them, her heart full of both joy and healing. Ms. Cora, who had been waiting at the door, came down to help with their bags, her own eyes glistening. Inside, the mansion felt different, warmer, more alive. The marble floors that had once echoed with lonely footsteps now carried the sound of Amara's excited chatter as she showed Tanya her room, the one Richard had prepared with such care. "Look, Mama, pink curtains, just like I always wanted." Amara twirled in the middle of her new bedroom, making the fairy lights twinkle. Later that evening, they gathered in the formal dining room. The long mahogany table that had for years served as a stark reminder of Richard's solitude now hosted a family dinner. Ms. Cora had outdone herself, preparing all of Amara's favorites, mac and cheese, honey-glazed chicken, and chocolate chip cookies for dessert. Laughter filled the room as Amara told stories from her day, her eyes bright with excitement. Tanya shared memories of Elaine's kindness, and Richard found himself smiling more than he had in years. After dinner, drawn by some invisible force, Amara wandered over to Elaine's piano. Her small fingers found the keys, and the first notes of "Amazing Grace" filled the air. The melody, slightly hesitant but true, seemed to wrap around them like a warm embrace. Then Tanya's voice joined in, rich and clear. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Her voice carried years of pain and hope, of falling and rising again. Richard closed his eyes, remembering how Elaine used to play this very song, but instead of the usual ache, he felt peace. Deep, profound peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. The music swelled, mother and daughter in perfect harmony, while Richard sat in his favorite chair, watching his new family with wonder. The empty spaces in his heart, carved out by loss and loneliness, were filling with something precious and new, not replacing what was lost, but creating something beautiful from the broken pieces. The Atlanta summer brought new life to the mansion's grounds. 6 weeks after Amara came home, Richard stood in the freshly tilled soil of the garden, showing his daughter how to plant roses. Her small hands carefully patted the earth around a tender seedling. "Like this, Daddy?" she asked, her face serious with concentration. "Perfect." Richard smiled, watching her work. "You know, these roses are just like us. New roots grow stronger after the storm." Amara nodded wisely, understanding more than her 9 years might suggest. Just like how Mama got stronger too. Across the garden, Tanya was arranging flowers for the grand opening of the Amara Grace Home for Children. She'd been sober for 4 months now, working part-time as a counselor at the new center Richard had funded. Her gentle way with the children there surprised no one. She knew their pain firsthand. Richard had thrown himself into the project, converting one of his empty office buildings into a safe haven for abused and neglected children. The center offered counseling, education support, and temporary housing for families in crisis. He'd also started mentoring young fathers, sharing his own journey of redemption. Each Sunday now found the three of them in the front pew at Calvary Baptist Church, where Richard had resumed his role as youth ministry supporter. The congregation had welcomed them with open arms, especially Amara, who joined the children's choir. "Can we plant another one?" Amara asked, already reaching for another rose seedling. "Of course, sweetheart." Richard replied, watching as his daughter's hands carefully worked the soil. Each small moment like this felt like a miracle, a reminder that God's grace could transform even the deepest wounds into something beautiful. The autumn leaves danced in the courtyard as hundreds gathered for the grand opening of the Amara Grace Home for Children. Inside the gleaming new building's main hall, Richard stood at the back, his heart swelling with pride as Amara approached the grand piano. She carefully set her faded pink backpack beside the piano bench, the same backpack she'd clutched that rainy night months ago. Richard watched as her small fingers touched the keys, and the first notes of "Amazing Grace" filled the room. Dozens of children sat cross-legged on the floor, their faces glowing with wonder as the music washed over them. When the final note faded, applause erupted through the hall. Amara jumped up from the bench and ran straight to Richard, her arms outstretched. "God really did hide me in your heart," she whispered against his chest. Richard felt tears well up in his eyes as he held her close. Tanya joined them, her smile radiant with pride and peace. Together they walked out to the courtyard where a white cross stood tall against the sky. As if on cue, church bells began to ring from the chapel next door, and sunlight broke through the clouds, bathing them in golden light. In that moment, Standing with his daughter and her mother beneath the cross, Richard understood that miracles didn't always come as expected. Sometimes they arrived in the form of a frightened child on a rainy night, leading to a journey of faith, forgiveness, and love that would last forever. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.